Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We are excited you've joined us for today's session, featuring ways to improve efficiency and effectiveness of your fundraising campaign. I've got a few housekeeping details before we get started. This session is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides tomorrow by email. Please feel free to share this webinar content with colleagues that could not attend today. A question and answer session will immediately follow the presentation. If you have a question for our speakers, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. This webinar is hosted and sponsored by Suttle-Straus. Suttle-Straus was founded in 1910. Over 100 years, our company has built up the equipment and expertise to handle almost any project. We offer creative design services, web, offset, and digital printing, wide format printing, direct and transactional mail, a print-on-demand technology for distributed networks, along with kitting and fulfillment. For more information about us, please visit us on the web at Suttle-Straus.com. Now, I think I'd like to kick it off with a poll for today. I'm curious from our attendees, how many vendors do you currently use for your appeal campaigns? So if you want to select a choice on your screen, just from the radio buttons available. We'll leave this poll open for a few seconds, and then we'll close it and share the results with everybody. So get your votes in now. Play a little Jeopardy music. All right, we'll be closing in 3, 2, 1. It looks like most of you are doing pretty good. 30% have one vendor and 71% have 2 to 3 vendors for managing these big campaigns. All right, thank you for voting. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Theresa Aide has almost 30 years of experience in print and mail services and coordinates large appeal projects for nonprofits like the Diocese of Madison, the Diocese of La Crosse, and the University of Wisconsin Foundation. Karen Wenning started her career serving luxury brands at an advertising agency before moving into a full-time job advising large print clients like La-Z-Boy, Steelcase, and Carestan. Ladies, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can take it away.
Hi, everyone. This is Theresa Aide. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us today. As Megan said, I've been in the industry a very long time. I've specifically been with Suttle-Straus for 20 years, working in customer service and also account management. Have a real passion for helping clients kind of take those projects that they're looking to do from concept to completion. And I've seen a lot of changes, obviously, through the years with printing and mailing and variable imaging. So I look forward to kind of giving you some advice and tips today to help you with your next appeal.
Hello, and thank you for sharing your lunch with us today. This is Karen Wenning. If you heard that whirring noise in the background, you know we started our webinar on time. That is our Wednesday noon tornado siren, so apologies for that in case you were wondering. As Megan said, I come from the agency side. I worked for an advertising agency for 12 years, and ironically, Theresa was my contact at Suttle-Straus during that time. So we've known each other for a long time, and we are going to host this together today. So are inefficient marketing processes costing you time and money? As we said, we want to talk today about ways to save you time and money. Most of our clients tell us that their biggest challenge is that they just don't have enough time. In this case, they want to spend more time with donors, or they're spending too much time managing vendors. And it's the one resource that you can't get back, right? Time. You can make more money, but you can't get more time. So we're going to share some recommendations on how and where to save time and money.
What we've done for today is we took a look at the overall scope of a campaign. We felt it was easiest if we broke the campaign down into the various steps that it needs to go through in order to be successful. So we have the strategy, the campaign schedule, creative, production and distribution, and then the direct mail. So today, Karen and I, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each one of these milestones, and we're going to offer suggestions on ways you can save time and money, and hopefully give you some marketing tips to help you increase that engagement.
So the logical place to start is obviously with your strategy. How do you figure out what your goals are for the coming year, and where will you start?
So what we do, you know, I'm sure most of you are probably wrapping up a spring campaign, or you maybe are in the middle of the 2018 campaign, and you're looking now towards your next campaign. So what we like to do with clients when they're ready to start thinking about that next campaign is we take a look at the previous campaign as a whole. We meet with the clients, we set out all the pieces that they used in that campaign, and we really take a good look at what items worked, what didn't work, did they try something new, and what were the results of that? Was your brand consistent and recognizable? So that's kind of our starting point when we start to strategize, is we take a look at that previous campaign and try to figure out from that point, from what was previously done, maybe what we need to change for the next campaign.
So what do we need to do? What would we like to change? Let's take a real example. With the Diocese of La Crosse this year, their donations are up 3%, but their donors were down. The number of donors were down. So knowing that information, how do we use that going forward? You know, what tactics should we use to both increase our donations and our donors for next year? How many never givers do we have? What about the Libons and Sivons? How do we bring them back? How do we talk to them according to who they are and send them the materials that are going to appeal to them?
So when we look at an appeal, we really kind of look at it as having three different audiences that you are speaking to. You have your donors, so you have the people that you know that are making those donations. Every time you send out an appeal, you have your group that's constantly sending back your donations. But then you also have this other group, the new members and the non-donors. And if you're sending out an appeal campaign and that everything is the same to every group, you're really kind of missing the mark with targeting your new members and your non-donors differently. You really need to target them in a way where you're making an emotional connection to them. So how do you go about doing that? How do you segment them out and target them differently than your donors?
So typically we think about the people that we know versus the people that we don't know, right? Less than 50% of those who open letters read the body text, but most readers will look at a picture and read the caption. So what we want to do is we want to draw the people in by using imagery. The three things to keep in mind when making an emotional connection are images. 90% of the information that is sent to the brain is visual. Headlines that'll draw the prospect in, and color. Color versus just using one color or black and white is recognized 26% more than black and white in marketing. So with the brain processing images 60,000 times faster than text, we really need to draw them in with the right imagery. So here are some examples of how we do that. On the left-hand side, we're showing some graphs. Graphs are a great way to bring the focus in and certainly show how the dollars are being spent. In the middle, we have more graphs, and then on the right-hand side, the use of color to really draw the consumer in. Approximately 71% of donors feel more engaged when they receive content that is personalized.
So a couple examples that we have on screen here. The image on the left, that was a specific piece that the UW Foundation did last fall. So just a little bit about UW Foundation and kind of how they go about their campaign. They do a big spring campaign mailing, and they also do a campaign mailing in the fall. And typically what they do is they go through the same thing where they strategize. They do a lot of different testing of different mail packages to see, what type of package will work with the different audiences that they're targeting. And so when their marketing group and their designers get together, they kind of come up with different mail packages that they want to try. And they'll give me specs on that, and we'll quote it. And we may go several rounds of quoting and trying to figure out how to get something that is within their budget. So that image on the left was one of the campaigns that they did as a test last fall. What that is, you can see that there's handwritten messaging on that. That's actually done with an actual ballpoint pen. So what we did is we partnered with a company that specializes in that, and that was actually a matched mailing. And the messaging on there is coming from a student that's graduating in 2019. And so there is a pledge card that goes in there as well. And so what it did is, it looks like instead of it being an inkjet font, it's an actual ballpoint pen. So it looks like it's that personalized note. And that campaign was so successful for them, that specific mail package, that they are doing it again this fall. The image on the right, they have found that using images on letters of students gets a better response than images that are of campuses. So this image here, one of the campaigns that they wanted to do last year as well, it had 20 different versions of 4-color images at the top for the different letters, because they wanted to have a specific image for each school that they were sending it out to, whether it be engineering or nursing or music. And the thing was that if you can imagine 20 different versions of a 4-color letter, it was very costly. So we kept going back and forth trying to find out how they could do that, but still keep it within their budget. And they had a lot of variable programming within this too, so it had to be something that could be done digitally. So what we discovered is, if they were to just reduce the size of that letter from 8.5 by 14 to 8.5 by 13.5, if they could just reduce it by 1/2 inch, what that did is it now allowed us to print, instead of 1 letter at a time on a press sheet on the digital press, it allowed us to print that letter 2 up on a sheet. So if you can imagine printing 2 up, we now have half the press time, we have half the paper. So in general, it saved them about $5,000 just reducing that letter by 1/2 inch. So as you're going through that strategy phase, you really want to make sure when you're looking at the different types of packages that you want to mail, you probably really need to go several rounds of quoting with someone to really kind of get what you want that fits within your budget. And I think on the next slide, we have some images that we did. So this is another client that I work with. As you can tell, they're wine bottles. So what this is an all digital piece that's done variably, and it's for wine clubs. And so what they have here is they know the buying history of the people that they're sending these direct mail pieces out to. So when this is being variably programmed so that the wine cases that they're offering to these people, it's based on their buying history. So for example, if they know that my buying history would be that I like white wines, that's what they're going to send me. They're not going to send me a special, like, Theresa, here's a case of red wine. I probably would throw it away because I'm just not a red wine drinker. So they know the buying history. They also have special offers in here as well. So this is saving them money because it's all being done in one mail stream. It's being done digitally. It's variably being personalized for that individual as well. So these are just examples of how personalization is so much more than just the name and address. And when you're strategizing, thinking about how you can make that piece so much more customized for those people that you're targeting.
And according to the DMA, you actually get a 30% greater response when the pieces are customized and personalized for the individual that is receiving them.
And another thing to consider too is the envelope that you're mailing this piece out in. A 6x9 envelope, it costs the same for postage as it does a number 10. But what it does is 6x9 or 6x9.5 even, that envelope is going to stick out in the mailbox. It's not going to get hidden amongst all the clutter if you use the number 10. So we have an example of a 1-color envelope on the left, and then we also have what's called a showcase window envelope. So while that showcase window envelope in itself, that might be a little bit more expensive, The great thing about a showcase window envelope, you're addressing it on the back side where the flap is, and you really don't need to print anything on that. You can really inkjet everything from the return address, the mailing address, and the indicia. So you have to think of it in terms that the envelope itself may be a little bit more expensive, but you won't need to print anything on it because obviously what you're showing is what's showing through that showcase window. And that's something that, again, the UW Foundation, that's another kind of piece, mail package that they use a lot of for testing. And that one has been very well received as well. So on the next slide, we have an example of that showcase envelope. So in this specific package, what they've done is it does not contain a brochure, but what they have here is what they call a photo card. It's almost like a postcard. And the intent here is that it has a nice image. It's like a piece of art. So they're hopeful that people will want to keep that. Maybe hanging on the fridge is what they're hoping, that people will keep it, and then it stays top of mind because they have put now a nice art image on the front of that card. And so they include with that the pledge form and the reminder, the business reply envelope with that as well. But this is a campaign, another mail package that they do. Again, it's very successful for them, and they typically do this in the fall every year. So just some ideas of thinking about how to mail something different than just putting it in a regular 6x9.5 envelope. You could put a card in here, or you could even print a card. There's a lot of different special stocks out there as well that you can, try to get some different ideas of something that is something that a person will want to hang on to and not throw away.
So now that you've figured out what your strategy is, we need to put it to a timeline. So when we did the poll earlier, 71% of you responded said that you're using 2 to 3 vendors to execute a campaign. So one thing I'd like to point out here is that reducing the number of vendors that you're using and managing fewer vendors is obviously a way to save both time and money. But within the vendors that you are using, it's incredibly important to be transparent with them so that you have a cohesive campaign. Teresa's going to talk about this later, but knowing that your processor, everything is going to work with your processor that's coming out of production. Having the videographer be in line with the photographer that might be doing the creative so that that campaign looks similar and is recognizable in the market.
So a timeline. From a vendor standpoint, this is such a critical part of the success of the campaign, because I'm sure when you go into the campaign, you know the date that you're looking at, that you want that mail to arrive in home, or if you have marketing pieces that you're sending out to any sort of distributed network, you know the date that you want those marketing materials to arrive as well. So now that we've kind of gone through the strategy, and I know production-wise how much time it's going to take to produce those pieces, I can now go to our scheduling department, and first I want to make sure I've blocked out that time from a production standpoint so that, when that job comes in, we've got our production time reserved. But it also gives me the ability to find out when do I need to have the data? When do I need to have proofs approved? When do we need to have the variable approved? And from those dates, I can now start working backwards to create a full schedule so that, all these different vendors that you might be working with, they know exactly when they need to have their part of this campaign complete so that everything stays on track to meet that mail date or that ship date. One of the other things here specifically that I kind of want to just point out, I have test data listed on there. So the Diocese of Madison and La Crosse, for example, that we work with, those pledge forms are going to a gift processor, and there's a scan line or a 2D barcode on those pieces. And in order for that campaign to be successful, those pledge forms need to be able to read, the gift processor needs to be able to read the barcode and the scan lines. So what we ask is that before we even print anything, we request that the clients will send us in a sampling of, say, 25 to 50 live records. And we actually run that straight through our data processing department. We kind of run it through like it's the actual job. We run it through data processing. We run it through variable comp. We try to get all the bugs worked out ahead of time if there's questions with the composition or with data processing. We print it on the stock that it would actually print on with the actual artwork, and then we send those live pieces out for a gift processor to test. So, you know, what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to print, say, 100,000 shells that you are envisioning that you're going to imprint on, only to find out the weight of the stock is too heavy, or there wasn't enough clear white space left for the barcode. So I always like to make sure that that's factored into the schedule. If there's any sort of question about how those pledges are going to be scanned, I always want to make sure that that's factored in the schedule as well. And what that also does is when the job is a live job, you've kind of now worked out all the issues that or questions that you may have with the data up front. So it's just something that's a safeguard to make sure you don't have products sitting on the floor that you can't use, or you are late with the job because you have a lot of questions when it actually comes in. So creative. Is it time to refresh your material? Karen and I attend a few different conferences throughout the year. One of the conferences that we went to late last year, one of the things that I think we heard a lot of was that people were looking to refresh their material. They kind of had felt like the marketing pieces that they were sending out, they looked the same year after year. And like Karen had mentioned earlier, maybe the donations were up, but the donors were going down. So they have an understanding that they need to try to get to those non-donors or those new members. So they were looking for a way to refresh the material. So we have a few tips on these next few slides about how you can do that.
So first I'd like to start by saying, if there's one thing that you take away from the presentation today is leverage your vendor, leverage what they know, and give them the opportunity to provide opportunities for cost savings. Theresa gave the example earlier with changing the size of the piece. And you know, when they stop bringing you new ideas, then that might be the time that it is to start looking for a new vendor. So if you feel like you're doing the same pieces over and over again, this is where you want your creative part to come in, right? So some simple changes can be done that don't necessarily add any cost. One thing to consider is changing the orientation. So if you always do horizontal, consider doing a vertical piece. You can add a simple die cut or a perf off. It can add interest and engagement without necessarily adding more costs. I always say that if your graphic designer works for the company that's doing the printing as well, they have an unfair advantage in delivering the message. The reason for that is they can go on the floor, they can understand how many pieces, what size they need to print to get how many pieces up on a sheet, and really leverage their knowledge and the knowledge of the team. Also, if your direct mail is all handled in-house, then you have the opportunity to look at your direct mail specialist in conjunction with your graphic designer to ensure that everything is going to qualify for the best postage rates. Another thing we want are images that are relatable, right? So using images of your own churches and parishes. This helps the reader connect and makes a more emotional connection. Images can be from the community events, they can be local photography, they can be landscapes that are unique to your area. One thing I want to point out with this particular image on the left-hand side is the videographer went on scene to do video that was going to appear in some other marketing channels, television and social media. But our photographer went on site with the videographer so she could capture some of the same imagery and use it in the campaign itself to make a more relatable piece. And then organization. How is the content organized? We really want to be telling a story with each reveal. It can make a huge difference. So in this example below, it starts out with something that's very visual, because we talked about bringing the reader in with something visual. And then when you open up a flap, you get a little bit of copy and more visuals, relatable images, and then more content, and then a big graph that also draws the reader in, and then finally the full reveal with all of the panels open. So we're really telling a story as we move through this piece. And I realize that in a presentation like this, it's hard to get a real feel for the materials that we're showing. If you see anything of interest to you or you'd like us to send you samples, you can put a notation in the chat and we'd be happy to do that following this presentation.
Consistency. You want to make sure that your brand is consistent across all of the different channels that you're using. So if you're doing print, if you have social media, if you're doing the video, a newspaper ad, a TV ad, you really want to make sure that every piece has a consistent element across all of them so that it's recognizable. As you can see here from the prayer card, the brochure, tabloid, poster, all of those, it's very consistent. And even the one color pieces, we also want to make sure that even if it's just a one color piece, that also is consistent with the four color. We're pulling out a color from the four color pieces, using it on the one color pieces and making sure that that one color is the same one color that's used on those different items as well. One thing I want to point out specifically kind of here on this slide, and when we were talking about like the strategy part of stuff and looking at an appeal or looking at a campaign and what you can do differently, you can see on this specific one this was for the Diocese of Madison, and this was their 2016 campaign, and it contained a brochure and a prayer card. This is what they were mailing out in that 6x9 envelope, and this was something that they had been mailing out year after year, with a brochure and a prayer card. So when we started talking to them about the 2017 campaign, when we looked at all the pieces, they said they wanted to try something different. They had been doing the same type of thing every year. So as we had all the pieces laid out, what stuck out to us is that here we have this 6x9 envelope, and we're putting in a brochure that's relatively small. I think that's probably about 3.5 inches wide, maybe 8 inches in height. So you had a lot of real estate inside of this envelope that they weren't utilizing. So we kind of played around with different concepts and what to change. And if we can go back one slide, that piece that Karen just showed, this piece, so this is what they ended up changing it to in 2017. As you can see, it ended up being just one piece. We incorporated what was the prayer card, what was the separate piece, we incorporated that into the brochure. So we've now taken what was two pieces and turned it into one, gave them a much bigger piece that's really utilizing all of the space in that envelope. And I'm sure that in looking at that, you would kind of think, because this piece is so much bigger from a costing standpoint, that it would be a lot more expensive. But we reduced the weight of the stock, and then you have two pieces that you were previously printing. So you have two setups on press, you have additional time in the bindery, you have an additional pocket for inserting. So if you take those costs and kind of compare it to now, it's just one piece that we're printing. 2017 to 2016 campaign as a whole were very comparable in pricing. So don't be afraid to kind of look at doing something that is bigger and different because you think the costing will be different. There's ways to cut costs and save you money so that you can get something completely different looking and still staying within that budget.
And along those same lines, in working with graphic designers during my agency time so much, I always found that if I gave them the general theme of what I wanted and I kind of let them loose with coming up with ideas and what that might mean to them, inevitably they would come up with something far better than what I would have had in my imagination. So you're always going to have opportunities to go back and make refinements and all of that, but to just kind of say, these are all the pieces that I need, and give that graphic designer what they're best at, which is the opportunity to make something truly creative out of it.
In visual appeal, and again, this is a piece that, because you can't tell from the screen, this has special coatings on it. We have a dispersion coating on it, so it's got gloss and dull, and it's really giving, and it's in a textured coating as well, so it's giving this a really, really nice effect, if you could see it, with that stained glass window. So when you're looking at printing your pieces, take this into consideration as well. Try adding special coatings to add a special effect to that piece. And this was a piece that we did, a new client that we had last year for the Diocese of La Crosse, who came to us because they were looking to refresh their material. They had been doing kind of a very common 3-panel brochure for several years, and they reached out to us last year and had asked if we could come up with something new for them to do. And this was a really well-received piece. It used a lot of bright colors. You can see it has different types of folding in here. We incorporated, again, the prayer card into this piece. So this was a piece that, you know, was completely different from anything that they had been doing before. And it went over really well. And then also something else to consider too, that you can do is special finishing touches, like die cutting. So this is something, you know, if you want to add a special effect to your piece, you can do that with die cutting as well.
And here again, your graphic designer might make a recommendation. Oh, I kind of see this is a stained glass window. I kind of see this having the dispersion, which is that dull and gloss effect. Or I want a soft touch, meaning that when the person picks it up, it's going to have a meaningful feel to them to increase engagement. Okay, we're moving on to production and distribution. And how do you go about getting standout material that's within your budget? Concept to completion, execution is everything. We all know this. And at this point, you've spent a great deal of time and resources developing this campaign. You've invested in photography, design, building the strategy, so your final product needs to deliver on the quality. Executing the campaign to meet the deadlines and the dates is so important, and this is where you don't want to cut yourself short. And one other thing I want to add here is that many times we have clients and they just want to print just the quantity that they think that they need. But a way to save money is to not have to go back on press. So you're almost better off to print 500 more than you need, so that if a parish needs some more materials, you have it available to send. And if they don't use it, you throw 500 away versus going back on press at a later time to print a smaller quantity.
And distribution, you know, if you have marketing materials that you need to get out to your distributed network, you know, vendors who specialize in print production and also do the distribution are really the experts to help print, pack, and ship that material. What we're trying to just show here is just if you are trying to distribute your marketing material yourself, you kind of look at all the steps on the left that it's going through. The printer is basically delivering it to the diocese, and then someone there is sorting and packing it, and then they're re-delivering it again into that parish, versus, you know, having a printer who is an expert at doing distribution and letting them do the distribution, the packing, and the shipping. And what also is nice about that is in the shipping, once all of that's done, here's a report with all your tracking information, so that if somebody were to call you saying they can't locate their item, you have tracking information available to you. One of the conferences that we went to a couple years ago, there was somebody there that had told me they actually rented a U-Haul truck, and they would load the U-Haul truck up with all of the material that needed to go out to, you know, like 80 different parishes, and he would drive around this U-Haul truck and deliver everything directly to them. It's nice that he wanted to do that, but it just seems, you know, in looking at that, you think about all the time and the money that he's doing to provide that service versus letting somebody else do that for you.
So this is an area where you can drastically reduce the amount of time that you're spending. You can see the duplicate processes happening here, the double shipping, the double packaging, the double sorting. And then we're going to get into letting your data work for you. This goes to our direct mail portion. First, I'd like to explain a little bit about the differences between different types of printing. So we have digital printing, which is where we can do the variable data, which means we can take information out of the data that you have regarding your donors, and we can pull that into the pieces that we're printing. So every one that comes off the press is unique and different. That is different than when you have a static piece and you're printing 50 or 100,000 of them, and we would put those on a sheet fed press. So they're different printing processes, and they allow us to do different things. And variable data printing is not limited to just changing, writing your first name, Dear Theresa. It's much more than that, including imagery and more. And Theresa's going to talk about that now.
So the postcard that we're showing here was a marketing piece that we did, and I thought it was just a really good example to show, like Karen said, how much more personalization is than just the name. This sample here contains 11 different variable elements that we're using, from the gender, the background color, the photos, the name of the person, as well as on the back, even location. If you have different store locations, or if it's different parishes, or whatever your market may be, calling that out based on the address of that individual and where they live, maybe the offer codes, the dates. So you can tell that there's a lot you can do with variable besides just that name and address. And a couple other examples I wanted to show here, monthly reminders. So you've sent out your appeal campaign, you have people that have made donations and they want to make them on monthly payments. You want to make sure that you're getting those monthly payments back from those people. So you really need to make sure that you have a plan in place. Letting your vendor know that every month at the first of the month, let's say you're going to send in the data file for your monthly reminders, and it needs to be out within 5 working days. Like, this is something when you're in that strategy phase that you should be talking about as well. The monthly reminders should become a very automated type of process, because you don't want to miss out on those opportunities to get those pledges. And again, this would be something as well that we would test. As you can tell on this one, there's some formatting at the bottom with the ID, appeal code, and the check digit. So again, these are pieces that we test as well to make sure that they run through the gift processor. Diocese of Cross, another reminder that they do, which is in a little bit of a different format, but still they have a 2D barcode, which is what they use for their appeal scan. And again, it's just something that we test with a different type of format, but it's something that comes in every single month, and we're getting those turned out within 5 days once they come into us. This example, I was kind of taking a look at a few of the appeal mailings that we had done, and I was looking at, we've done follow-up mailings that clients are doing. And that follow-up mailing, if you're kind of sending the follow-up mailing and it looks just the same as you did that initial appeal mailing, chances are you're really not making that emotional connection that we talked about earlier with that person. So I was trying to think of, ways to try to incorporate something that would draw somebody in to look at that letter differently than maybe what they did on that first mailing. So here's just kind of an example of something that a vendor can do very easily for you. So let's say you have a region that you work with and you have several counties that you're servicing. If you were to take, say, a dozen images kind of scattered throughout that region. So you would send, say, a dozen images of different parishes, and here's the images, and here are the zip codes that those parishes reside in. And here's our data file. Now, what we would like you to do is each record within that data file, map whatever parish is within a 20-mile radius to that individual, and drop that parish picture into the letter. So, kind of thinking about, people that maybe live in this area, for example, that maybe live 70 miles out of Madison. If you were to put a picture of a parish of Madison within a letter going to somebody that's in a small community, 70 miles outside of the city, they may look at that picture and have no connection to that because they don't know what parish that is. But now if you're starting to drop in some images of something that is within the area that they live in, chances are they're most likely to keep that letter open longer to really take a look at it, because now they see something in that letter that is recognizable to them. So, this is an easy way to kind of incorporate something into that by letting that vendor, because the programming software has become so sophisticated that you really are just saying, here's a dozen images, here's the zip codes, here's my data file, map it up, and map up each record and put that image into the letter. So it's just an idea and a thought of how to make that emotional connection as you're doing those follow-up mailings.
Right, and so why is this important? Because direct mail brings in 78% of those donations for nonprofits. So anything that we can do to make these direct mail pieces more engaging is going to help increase the amount of donors and increase the amount of donations. Well, we've taken you through the 5 milestones of the campaign. And so strategy, schedule, creative, production and distribution, and then direct mail. And we appreciate you spending your lunch with us today. We have provided you with a link in the chat section so that you can see a campaign from concept to completion that we did for the Diocese of La Crosse. And Theresa and I are going to be available now for any questions as well.
Well, thank you both for that informative presentation. We will now open it up for questions. If you have a questions for speakers, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. While everyone is submitting questions, I wanted to remind you that this webinar has been sponsored by Suttle-Straus. If you're looking for a trusted vendor to help guide you through your next fundraising project, please consider us. And at this link we've posted in the chat window, you can watch the video, and that's also where you can request a sample from the Diocese of La Crosse campaign. So if you'd like a follow-up, you can enter your information there. Let's see what we have for questions. Margaret wants to know if you've done anything bilingual.
Yes, we actually have done quite a few pieces that are bilingual. We've done a lot in Spanish. So typically the information comes to us already translated. We do other work with other clients. So I have some websites that we handle in 5 different languages. Theresa can speak specifically to the Casa Hogar, I believe.
Yes, well, Diocese of Madison and Diocese of La Crosse actually, the Diocese of Madison, I should say, they do Spanish brochures. So they actually have a translator. First, what will happen is we creatively complete the English version of a piece, and then we give them that content. They send it out to a translator, and then they give that content back to us, and then we create the Spanish pieces. So we are doing that as well. Madison does the Spanish one.
Great. And I guess everybody always wants to know about the costs and how you justify increasing your spend for things like color and coding and making your pieces bigger. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I think perhaps Diocese of La Crosse might be a good example. I know they would have spent, that's something they would have spent more on this year because they were trying to bring in new donors, and they did. They brought in over 700 new donors this year. So you have to look at it in terms of if you're trying to target new members or non-donors, spending the extra spend should outweigh what you're getting back in new members and donations.
Right, and that's how you calculate your ROI. I think sometimes we do hear that, if we send out a piece that has, some coatings and things on it, then some of the existing donors will say, oh, that looks like it's too expensive, right? So there might be a few complaints about that, but when you're bringing in 700 new donors that you never had before, you kind of have to weigh one against the other. The other thing there is, as Theresa pointed out several times, we have different audiences we're talking to. We have the people that are always donating, right? And then we have the people that we don't know. So maybe what you do is you spend a little bit more money on the people that you don't know, more appealing images for the millennials, for example, if you want to bring in a younger audience, and then maybe cut back on your spend on the larger portion of the donors that you already know. So that's what we were talking about with how do we talk to the different audiences and how do we get them to engage with the materials that we're sending out.
Great. And Peter asked, he wanted to know if you have any information about the response on the extremely long fold-out mailing. His staff thought that might be too long physically for people to read through the whole thing. So I think he's talking about this one I have up on the screen.
Right. From what we heard back from Madison on that one, it was positive feedback. I don't think I did not hear anything back specifically about it being too long of a piece. Yeah, that wasn't any sort of feedback that we had gotten that it was too long of a piece at all. You know, as Karen had described how it kind of unfolds and tells a story, if you physically kind of look at the piece, it makes it really easy to read, I guess, in that regard, because it does unfold in a way. So looking at it on screen, it may seem too long, but it really isn't when you physically kind of look at it. It makes it actually easier to read.
Yeah, so if you're going to have something that long, I think it's very important to have it professionally designed so it breaks it up so you only have to read one chunk at a time.
Right.
So the fold effectively makes it a smaller effort than it would seem.
Right.
And if you'd like to see that one in person, just put your address in and we'll send that one out.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we didn't properly answer the question about the English and Spanish side by side. So there's a number of different ways that we handle that. I have one client that they do a flip book. So they do it in English and it'll be right reading, and then you flip it over and upside down, which is right side up when you flip it over. Then that's the English version. So you have an English and a Spanish version on the same piece. So we can do that as well.
Yeah, because you've printed like patient guides that have to be in both English
Correct.
and Spanish together. So.
Yeah, and I previously worked with Sub-Zero and Wolf, and they actually did user guides that were in multiple languages as well.
Right. Or you'll do one face of a letter in English and the other side in Spanish.
Yeah.
Curious if any of your campaigns have tied into social media or online, or if there's any experience with that?
I don't have any experience with what my clients are doing with social media.
A lot of times our graphic designers will take imagery and the look and feel of the campaign and provide that look and feel to the organization so that they can put that on their website or their Facebook, things like that.
And a lot of your diocese campaigns have online donation options,
Right,
where they
yeah.
can go to the website
Right.
and donate. So, always good
But that's
to-
a good point because we do want to make sure that that's consistent as well. So you have the same feel when you go to the website as what they're getting in their mailbox. You want everything to be consistent.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have today. If you think of one later, you can feel free to email me at marketing@Suttle-Straus.com and I can get back to you. Watch your email tomorrow for a link to the recorded presentation and a PDF slide set. Click the link in the chat window to watch the video or request samples. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you, Theresa and Karen.